So the NFL divisional playoffs are today, right? We got Cincinnati versus Buffalo, or if you happen to be Allison Colbert, it's the Dallas Cowboys versus the San Francisco 49ers, right, Gail? All right. And as for the Browns, well, maybe next year. Maybe we could do that all together. As for the Browns, maybe next year. Yep. Every good sports team knows that the importance of pulling together. They know about team unity. And whether it's the Super Bowl or Little League, athletes understand something that churches really need to grasp, and that is the importance of unity. And that is why Paul is writing to the Corinthians. Be united in your response, he tells them. Walk the path, follow the footsteps of Jesus as one. Now, we're going to be reading for the next few weeks from Paul's first letter to the Corinthians. And so I'd like to spend a little bit of time getting to know a little bit about what was going on there in Corinth, to put this letter into its context. And I think that the first thing to recognize is that it is a letter. We are reading somebody else's mail. and because of that, sometimes you're going to get whiffs of it being a personal letter. He talks about people that he knows in Corinth, like Chloe and Crispus and Gaius and Apollos and Stephanos. And Paul didn't sit down one day and decide, well, I think I'm going to write the Bible. He was writing a letter to people that he knew in this community, and the people who read that letter found it to be so powerful, so meaningful, so inspiring in their lives that they, many years later, would decide, you know what, this is something that was inspiring for us. We believe that it's inspired for all people. And they thought perhaps we might find it inspiring too. And so it was decided to include it in what they call the canon. In other words, those books that we generally accept to be in the Bible. Now, Paul begins by invoking the name of Jesus 10 times in the first 10 verses of the first letter to the Corinthians. He's trying to invoke the authority of Jesus because, my goodness, he's got a difficult message to share in a difficult time to a difficult community, frankly. Corinth was a port city, and it had established quite a reputation for itself as a port city. I was actually in Corinth for a little while, and there was you can see the stones where Paul would have gotten off the boat there at Corinth, and that was kind of cool to think about. That's exactly where he was. You can also see there's a canal now, but it used to be a land bridge. So what would happen is the sailors would dock, unload their boats, sometimes even move the whole boat across this land bridge there, and they get to the other side. But now they have a canal there. I actually watched people jumping off a bridge into that canal using bungee cords, and that's when I knew I'm not going to bungee jump. But at any rate, the point is that, man, it was full of people spending like drunken sailors because it was full of drunken sailors. That's what Corinth was all about. It was famous for prostitution, and for drinking, and in fact the sex workers in other towns were called Corinthians because they had such a reputation in Corinth. Paul is writing this letter about the year 55 AD, and Corinth was a divided community. There was bickering and gossiping and arguing. They had very loose sexual morals. There were problems with incest and getting drunk on communion wine. So they would gather for communion and things got out of control. There was conflict in the church, and all of these things were weighing heavily on Paul's mind as a pastor because he had been there. He had got this church started, set them on their course. And so Paul writes right at the beginning of the letter, in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 10, I've got a serious concern to bring up with you, my friends, and using the authority of Jesus, our master, I will put it as urgently as I can. You must get along with one another. You must learn to be considerate of one another, cultivating a life in common. And I bring this up because someone from Chloe's family brought up a most disturbing report to my attention that you're fighting among yourselves. Unity is Paul's first concern. The first thing that he wants to write about in chapter 1. We belong to the United Church of Christ. Unity is also one of our highest priorities. Now, when the different churches came together, 4 different churches essentially formed one church in 1957, we did not have all of our theological differences worked out. We didn't hammer out all kinds of doctrinal statements at that time, and in fact, we still haven't got it all sorted out because we do have different beliefs, and that's okay. We are cool with that. There are some people who would like a church where everything is in order and all of the doctrines are completely spelled out in the minutest detail and everyone is expected to believe things exactly the same way. We're not one of those churches, sorry. And sometimes it's a hot mess, because we can have 100 people and we believe things 100 different ways and we're like, cool, because that's real, that's authentic. We can be one even when we're not the same. Because unity is not contingent upon uniformity. The wonderful rock band U2 expresses it well in a song that they sing called One. We're one, but we're not the same. We get to carry each other, one. And they point out that it's not that we got to carry each other, but we get to. In other words, it's grace. It's an opportunity that we have to serve one another, to lift one another up, to help one another along the way, whether we're the same or not. The Constitution of the United Church of Christ makes this very clear, that we are covenanted together, and yet every congregation is autonomous. We form our own covenants. We write our own constitution as we choose to bind our lives together. And so today we've got our annual meeting, and it's a manifestation of that, right? We manage our own communal life together, and we are many. We are diverse, like that plywood, and yet we are bonded together as one, and we are stronger for that reason. Now, it might seem kind of odd, but it is actually for that very reason that this church might not be for everybody. For some, I don't know, pettiness and arguing is what church is all about, And if they're not arguing with someone or saying that somebody is wrong about something or rejecting someone, then they're like, well, then your church doesn't stand for anything. It's like rejecting and arguing is what religion is supposed to do. And it's like, no, I don't think that's what Jesus is calling us to do. Rather, Paul and Jesus are calling us to be one even when we're not the same. Once upon a time, there was a man who was on a bridge, and he had reached a point in his life where he was so despondent that he stood on that bridge thinking about taking his own life. A second man saw this, and he ran up to him, and as a church-going man, he wanted to help his neighbor. And so he said, wait, stop, don't do it. You've got so much to live for. And the man says, no, I have nothing to live for. Maybe I can help you, said the second man. Are you spiritual? Are you religious? He says, yes, I actually am. Well, me too, said the guy who came to help him. And he says to the man on the bridge, so are you Christian or Muslim or Jewish or Buddhist? And he goes, well, I'm a Christian. Well, me too, the guy says. See, we've got so much in common. Tell me, would you be like a Catholic or a Protestant? And he goes, well, I'm a Protestant, actually. Well, me too, the guy says. See, look, we've got all these things in common. I'm here to help you. But I would like to know, by the way, would you be a Calvinist, a Wesleyan, a Lutheran, a liberal, a conservative, a evangelical, a fundamentalist? He goes, well, I'm an evangelical, actually. Oh, that's great. Me too, the guy says. Tell me, would that happen to be, just curious, would you happen to be like a charismatic, Reformed, or Baptist? I'm a Baptist. Oh, me too, the guy says. Oh, brother, we've got so much going on here together. But just to be clear now, would that be Conference Baptist, Southern Baptist, Northern Baptist? I want to make sure we got... Well, I'm Conference Baptist, the guy said. Well, me too, said the helper. And just, one more question. Would it happen to be the 1932 conference or the conference of 1946? Well, the conference of 1932, the guy on the bridge said. Oh, really? What is wrong with you? He said. You heretic. I'll tell you what's wrong with you. It's a silly story because it's kind of true, Well, we should be helping each other out. My goodness, we have so much that unites us, and yet we tend to focus on what divides us. And sometimes we've even bombed one another. We burned one another at the stake. We have taken those divisions to an extreme, and it's simply shameful, and it's an embarrassment to true spirituality. The Spanish Inquisition, my goodness, is such a far cry from the call to discipleship that was first heard on the shores of Galilee. And this is what happens sometimes if we can lose sight of our calling. And we can allow pettiness and bickering and arguing to divide us. Again, going back to that song by U2 called One. It was written in part, they say, from it was actually written at a time when the band was thinking about breaking up. And so it's a song about that, but it's also, Bono said, parts of it are from the perspective, the point of view of a gay son who is coming out to his religious father. And the song goes, you ask me to enter, but then you make me crawl. But I can't keep holding on to what you've got when all you've got is hurt, one love. Sometimes we ask people to enter, but then we make them crawl. And when we say all are welcome in this congregation, all are welcome means kind of what you think it means. All are welcome. In today's reading from the Gospel according to Matthew chapter 4, Jesus calls these two brothers, Peter and Andrew, to leave the old nets behind and to walk with him. And they choose to walk with Jesus, and their lives are changed forever. Their lives would never be the same. And they become disciples first. Disciples means that they're walking with Jesus, they're followers of Jesus. And then they become apostles second. Apostles is different from disciples in the sense that an apostle is one who is sent out. And some reserve that term apostles for those first 12 who were called by Jesus. But I see apostles in residence here at Brecksville United Church of Christ. Those who are living that experience of the risen Christ, how you experience Christ alive in your hearts, in your lives, in your families. And then we are sent out to serve, not necessarily an ordained ministry, but to serve Christ in our families, in our workplaces, our world, our schools. The call is the same. It is to walk with Jesus Christ, who is our way and truth and life, to serve with compassion in a way that is uniquely yours. Last month, I found inspiration in the Bible, but I also found inspiration in Lady Gaga and in the movie A Star is Born. Have you seen that movie? How many of you have seen A Star is Born with Lady Gaga? Okay, nice. And more than half of you, it seems. And there's a scene where Sam Elliott is talking to her, and he says this: music is essentially 12 notes between any octave. Is that right, Dave? All right, because I just need to do a fact check here, right? So 12 notes between any octave, and then the octave repeats. So it's the same story told over and over and over. All any artist has to offer is how they see those 12 notes. Now think of all the music that you've heard, whether it was Kate Klanowski singing at Carnegie Hall last Friday night, singing Schubert, or whether it's Lady Gaga or Bach or jazz or rap or classical. It is all the different emotions that are evoked through music, from joy to sadness to tension and serenity. All of them are simply 12 notes rearranged in a different way. The same 12. Now, Jesus called his disciples. At different times, the number was called 12. Other times, they say he had 70 disciples. Another time, he sent out 72. Another time, it says there were 120. Another time, it says there were 5,000. The number really doesn't matter as much as this, that each one of them heard that call, and in their unique way, they expressed their call to discipleship through the unique circumstances and actions of their lives. Peter and his loud mouth, blurting things out. John and his mysticism and in his love. Thomas through his skepticism and his questioning. Andrew in the way that he recognized the gifts of others and called them forth to participate. Martha and Mary through their hospitality and their listening. Mary Magdalene in her steadfast dedication to Jesus, even when all of the others had run away and abandoned him. And think of all of the different expressions of discipleship that you've experienced and observed in others, from whether it's St. Stephen, the first martyr, to Hildegard of Bingen in the Middle Ages, or Mother Teresa of Calcutta, to our gathering here. All of these are different expressions of that same call, unique expressions of those 12 notes, the call to discipleship that was heard by Andrew and Peter, heard by those first disciples, rearranged now into your life's work of discipleship. That's how we see our 12 notes. It's the only thing we really have to offer, is it? Is how in our lives there is that unique song, that unique arrangement of that same call. It's how we choose to love one another. Jesus never asked us to praise him. Jesus never asked his disciples to bow down and worship me. He doesn't say that. No, he simply says, follow me. And yet such a large portion of our time as a community of disciples is all about praising the Lord, praising Christ. I saw a sign on a church and it said, praise is what we do. And I'm like, good for you, man. That's nice. But I just don't recall Jesus asking us to do that. That's a good start, And you could praise the Lord if that's how you feel. Please go ahead and do that. It's just I don't recall Jesus ever saying praise me or worship me, but he does say follow me. He does say love one another. He does say serve one another. So I'm frankly a little less interested in praising the Lord than I am in following Jesus. Discipleship is that call to follow Jesus, not just to worship Christ. We are to walk with Jesus, not just talk the talk, but we walk as apostles in our homes, in hunger centers, in jails, and barrios. There is a hymn that has been a favorite of mine. In fact, we sang it here about a year ago today, and it's called El Pescador, or in English, in the New Century Hymnal, number 173, Lord, you have come down to the lake shore. And I want to tell you a little bit about that song. I first heard it back in 1981 on Cleveland's near west side at San Juan Bautista Church, where I gathered with a Latino community and listened to them singing and preaching in Spanish. And then I heard it again when I went to El Salvador for the first time in 1985 during the Civil War. And I heard the people there in these mud hut chapels with thatched roofs singing this same song about the call to discipleship. And I was inspired, and I heard that call, and I wanted to serve in El Salvador. I went back in 1992. Now, by this time, I had been ordained, and I had gotten kind of used to my life in the United States, and I remembered how beautiful El Salvador was in that first visit. I came back for the second visit. It didn't feel so beautiful anymore. I was like, yeah, I kind of like living in Cleveland. I like the orchestra. I like the art museum. I like the parks. I like that the roads are paved and there isn't garbage all over the place. And I went back to El Salvador, and that's what I saw. And I was like, yeah, poverty is hard. It really is. You see the garbage piled up in the streets. It has a smell. It has an unpleasant aspect to it. And I decided at that point, I don't really know if I'm cut out for this kind of life. I'd rather just stay in Cleveland. I don't have to go to El Salvador. I'm not sure I want to anymore. And then I heard that song again. And I felt called to discipleship, to serve in El Salvador. And what occurred to me was this: the poverty and the harshness and the pain of poverty and violence will still be there in El Salvador, whether I see it or not. That's really the choice I have to make. Will I choose to turn my back and not look? Or will I choose to see it day after day? And I chose to stay with them in El Salvador. And it was really this song that was that call to discipleship. It sustained me through those 10 years in El Salvador. We had a ministry to gang members that we called Otro Mar, and we sang it at every meeting. After we met on Saturday, we would conclude with a Bible study, and then we'd go over to the pool hall and shoot pool together. But the group was called Otro Mar, because that's a line from the song. The word for gang is Mara. So it kind of sounds, it resonates, it sounds like Otra Mara, but the song is Otro Mar, which means another sea. Close to you, I will seek other seas. As we sing this song now, let's remember that. On the sand I have abandoned my small boat. Now with you I will seek other seas. Jesus is calling. If you are ready to leave those old tangled up nets behind, if you're ready to follow a way of life that is based on compassion and love and forgiveness and healing, if we're ready to follow Paul's call to unity, let's walk with Jesus and Peter and Andrew and Mary Magdalene and Chloe, and let's do more than just worship Christ. Let's follow Jesus as one and walk with Jesus on your unique path to discipleship.